Well, this is a bit of an experiment here. We're seeing if we can actually go live on both Facebook and on the Ian R. Crane YouTube channel. So hope this works. Well, gosh, it's cold this morning. It's -6 degrees here, but I'm not in my usual location. Let's see if we can get a bit more light on the matter here as the sun comes over the hills behind me. We're in East Lancashire, in Burnley, and in fact I'm by one of the engineering wonders of the 18th century, and I'm standing on the almost a halfway point in the Liverpool-Leeds Canal, and this is a 1 mile dead straight embankment that was built effectively to cross the valley here where the town of Burnley sits. And this is a beautiful, beautiful part of the country. Whilst those people who haven't been to Burnley or Blackburn or Nelson or Colne probably have an image of a bleak industrial landscape, once you're actually just outside the town limits, you are in absolutely stunningly beautiful countryside. And of course, unfortunately, it literally sits above the Bowland Shale. So obviously I'm not in the Kirby Misperton area at the moment, but the other side, the Pennines here, and the reason that I'm here is because Osprey Oil and Gas have now made noises about coming over here and having consultative meetings with the local authorities and with the local community. Oh, let's get my hat on the right way around. That's how cold it is. Hat was on back to front. Not thinking straight. Osprey is a company that basically looked as though it was in dissolution, and it's certainly in hibernation. And the last reported financial statement basically said that the company was held in abeyance, no trading. Well, the company is owned by a wannabe Jim Ratcliffe. It's a wildcat explorer by the name of Andrew Alistair Knott. And he has a number of other oil and gas industries which he seems to have acquired over the past few years. One of his active companies is Savannah Oil. He has interests in Niger, or Niger if you prefer, on the west coast of Africa. And he also has some interests in Canada, in the Arctic tundra, which should give a clue to his attitude towards the protection of the environment and the landscape. Well, he is one of the prime owners of Osprey Oil and Gas. And Osprey hold 2 licenses under 2 different company names from basically the M6 right across the M65 corridor through the Blackburn, Burnley, Nelson, Colne Valley. And this is an indication that Andrew Knott, who's certainly a very astute player, is seeing 2018 as the year in which the unconventional gas industry literally does get a toehold in the UK. Now, I doubt very much that Andrew Knott has any intention whatsoever of actually doing any exploratory drilling here in this valley himself. But what he'll do is he'll seek the planning permission, and then it's a bit like selling a house with planning permission for an extension, or selling a plot of land with planning permission to actually build a property on it. If you can sell your pedal license with planning permission already obtained, then obviously it has a significant increase in prospective value to the likes of Jim Ratcliffe, because the reality is that it is probably Jim Ratcliffe who would buy this area up. And so I absolutely implore those people who have been sort of sitting back looking at what's going on at Prestonby Road or over at Kirby Misperton and thinking, well, thank goodness that's not on my doorstep. Well, unfortunately, it looks like 2018 is going to be the year when this industry really does start to spread its wings and attempt to establish a presence. And last week, Tom Pickering of INEOS debated the local anti-fracking community in Eckington in North Derbyshire, And to put it mildly, he was totally spanked. And there is a video up, and in fact I've posted this, a link on my Facebook pages, and it's the video, it's the second half of the Q&A. But if you want to get a flavour for how that meeting went, just look at the last 55 seconds of that video, which is when the audience was invited to take a vote, and the meeting was chaired by the local MP. But the audience was invited to take a vote, and it was absolutely unanimous. I didn't see a single hand in the room go up when the chairman invited those in favour of unconventional gas industry moving into the area, and yet when he asked for those against, it was absolutely, look, unanimous. I didn't even see a hand go up for the abstentions. And this is, of course, what you will see almost at any public event where the industry challenges anybody who's done a little bit of research, because Tom Pickering of INEOS can only literally talk in palliatives, sound bites, and hope to goodness that you don't go away and do your own research. So INEOS obviously looking to establish their footprint across South Yorkshire, and also looking to come into North Yorkshire, south of Malton, and also, of course, over this part of the side of the Pennines, but a little bit further to the south of here, just the other side of Manchester. Well, of course, the target is the Bowland Shale, and where I'm standing right now is right above the Bowland Shale. In fact, I'm just a few miles south of the stunningly beautiful forest of Bowland, from which the Bowland Shale takes its name. And yet few people stop off in this area because they're too busy hammering up the M6 to go up to the Lake District or into Scotland. Well, another factor, of course, is that of the waste. And this is an issue that really hasn't had enough attention on this subject. And in fact, the industry and the government completely really tries to dismiss or ignore any questions regarding the waste, because the bottom line is they actually haven't got a clue. It's a bit like the nuclear industry in the 1950s, which worked on the basis that, well, let's just do it anyway because the technology will emerge which enables us to deal with this waste. Well, that technology hasn't emerged, and as I've articulated on numerous occasions, there is the distinct prospect that this network of wells that will be established if this industry gets a foothold across the north of England could become the repository for toxic nuclear waste. To give you an idea of how easily that could be hidden, of course, the Infrastructure Act has removed any requirement for any consultation with the local community of anything that's disposed of down these wells. And at this Eckington meeting, Tom Pickering stated that their objective was to be looking at about 400 wells in an area just 6 miles square. 400 wells. Now, it's not 400 vertical shafts, that's 400 laterals off of goodness knows how many vertical shafts on multiple well sites. So that's 400 wells in a 6 mile area. So potentially across the north of England there could literally be, like southern Queensland, many thousands of wells, and the waste that this will generate is way beyond anything like the capacity that we have here in the UK. And just to put that in perspective, a few days ago it was announced that Donald Trump is going to be taken to court by the Center for Biodiversity in the US following his announcement to permit a further 74 million acres of the Gulf of Mexico to be explored. Now, to put that in perspective, the UK is about 60 million acres. So that's about 25% more area than the UK to be licensed for oil and gas exploration. But more disturbingly is his announcement that he is going to permit the Gulf of Mexico to continue to be used as the dumping ground for highly toxic frack waste. And this is really an insight into the magnitude of the problem that the US has with frack waste, because they've tried evaporation ponds and they realized that this is causing massive contamination of the air as the evaporation process takes the toxic chemicals into the atmosphere. They've tried pumping it underground, and this has led to Oklahoma, of course, becoming the earthquake capital of the United States. It's led to an increase of seismic activity right throughout the US, and particularly obviously in those areas that have been designated as dumping zones for the reinjection wells and the toxic nuclear waste. But now, apparently, it's going to be necessary to dump an increasing amount of frack waste into the Gulf of Mexico. Well, I was actually shocked to find that in 2014, some 75 billion gallons of frack waste was dumped in the Gulf of Mexico. Let me say that again, 75 billion gallons, and I'll put the links under these videos in a few hours from now. This is an enormous amount of waste. Now, the Gulf of Mexico is a toxic soup, and of course that toxic soup was exacerbated in the aftermath of the Deepwater Horizon disaster in 2010, so what, 7.5 years ago, where 2/3 of the world's supply of dispersants was dumped into the Gulf of Mexico in a bid to sink the slick. And the reason that BP were trying to sink the slick was because their lawyers took a look at the prevailing US legislation and realized that the liability for cleanup was limited to the size of the visible slick. So somebody had the bright idea and said, well, let's make it invisible then. How do you make it invisible? Well, you sink it. So 2/3 of the world's supplies of dispersants, coupled with some 2 million gallons, as far as we're aware, 2 million gallons of one of the world's most toxic chemicals, Corexit, was dumped into the Gulf of Mexico in a bid to sink the slick. And this is Corexit 9500 and 9527, banned pretty much everywhere else in the world, but dumped in enormous quantities into the Gulf of Mexico, causing the slick to sink. But this has literally caused a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's led to phenomenal mutations of life there, with people, fishermen reporting of shrimps with no eyes, of lobsters with no claws, turtles with no eyes. I mean, horrendous deformation of wildlife. And don't think for 1 minute that this isn't impacting on the people who live in the Gulf Coast area. Now, you know, 7.5 years ago, in June and July of 2010, I was putting out through video and radio interviews that the 2 individuals who were responsible for this travesty were Bob Kaluza, but most importantly, Donald Vidrine, the 2 company men on the BP rig. And shortly after that, of course, I got a taste of what happens when you get a little bit too close to the truth, because I was also talking about the impact on the cleanup workers. I was talking about the impact on businesses, and all of a sudden 50 websites appeared overnight making some fallacious allegations. One that I had tried to disrupt the local activist community, and secondly that there was a $10 million lawsuit out on me for illegally recording a phone call. Well, this is total bullshit, but that's what happens when you get a little bit too close to the truth. It's why I've now had 2 bans from the Ian Rowland Crane Facebook page in the last 3 weeks. Primarily, I must be making some observations that are causing some concern to the establishment, and you know, so be it. But we'll always continue to find new ways to get the information out there. So please, as always, do your own research. But my counsel is, if you're in the US, if you're visiting the US at any time, do not touch the seafood, because a significant chunk of seafood that is eaten in the US comes from the Gulf of Mexico or the Pacific. And of course the Pacific is contaminated by Fukushima and the radiation from that event back in 2011, and obviously the double whammy of the dispersants, the Corexit, and now the multiple billions of gallons of frack waste that are being pumped into the Gulf of Mexico. And my counsel is, if you're visiting the United States, then be aware that if you're going down into southern Texas or South Louisiana, Mississippi, New Orleans, or even onto the west coast of Florida, just be very careful what it is that you are eating, because if it has come from the Gulf of Mexico, it's going to have a level of toxicity that is going to inevitably have some negative impact on your physical vehicle. So what's going to happen to the frack waste in the UK? Tom Pickering says 400 wells over a 6 mile square area. Imagine that, literally right across the whole of the north of England here, this beautiful part of the country. Absolutely stunning. Much of it still off the tourist trail, because people tend to head to the traditional tourist areas, and of course places that are on the traditional tourist trail like North Yorkshire under direct attack. And one well at Kirby Misperton, and there is some speculation, but there's been speculation on previous days that Greg Clark is going to make an announcement today about the Kirby Misperton well. Call it a hunch, he might, of course, but to do so right now would be a massive PR disaster. In fact, it's more likely that he does it on Christmas Eve, or sorry, the day before Christmas Eve, on the Friday about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when the media have all gone home for the holiday, and by the time they come back into the office, it's all forgotten and it doesn't get any publicity. Well, I can assure you, Greg, that if you pull a stunt like that, then it's going to get publicity through social media. And in reality, the people who pick up their information just from the mainstream media are probably not going to make any difference. So it's somewhat bitter here, as you can see, or maybe you can't, but the canal is actually frozen. I'm not going to try and walk on it, it's not that thick, but temperatures last night coming down well into the it's -5 now, so probably about -8, of course, during the course of the night. But that waste is incredibly important, and yet ever since the moratorium was lifted, this is an issue that has been skipped over. They trot out the likes of Lee Remsol, who was given a guided tour of the Quadrilla well site last week. Now, Lee is the chief executive of Remsol, which is a waste management company, and he was waxing lyrical, saying, how amazing, how wonderful, how beautiful, how clean, how safe, how dry the pad was at Preston Road, and how it had been designed to capture all the water, despite the fact that it was sitting at one of the lowest points in that catchment area. Well, of course, Lee, obviously not doing his own research, was not aware that just a couple of weeks ago the water was literally pouring off of the Preston Road well site into the adjoining meadows where the dairy herd graze. So Lee Petts of Remsol, of course, has a vested interest. He is hoping to benefit significantly from the millions of gallons of frack waste, and if he finds that the Remsol process can't handle it, then he'll probably just do, or try and do, what United Utilities did nearly 7 years ago, which was quietly dump some 2 million gallons of liquid waste from the pre-salt frack into the Manchester Ship Canal, and hope that nobody notices. So we are on the cusp, at the back end of 2017, of the sociopaths in British government and the sociopaths in the unconventional gas industry looking to go into 2018 with every intention of literally destroying the ecology of the UK, of turning large tracts of this countryside into land that is unusable and uninhabitable. And if we're going to put pay to that, then we, the collective we, need to get involved at every stage of the process. And as an absolute last resort, then we need to be ready to stand in front of those trucks and say, you're not coming in here, not in my name, not in my children's name or my children's children's name. And you know, the population of North Yorkshire is some 600,000 people, and about 10% of those live in the Harrogate area, about 5% live in the Scarborough area, and the rest are dotted around the rest of the county. If 0.005% of that population had been at the gates of Kirkby Misperton every day for the last 2.5 months, this would all be over now. It would all be done, it would all be dusted, and the British government would have got the message, and the industry would have got the message, that this has no social license. But we live in a democracy, and this is a democracy that relies upon apathy. It relies upon people not having the desire or the time, even if they do have the desire, to demonstrate their opposition. So 2017 looks like we're going to finish with another frack-free year. Six, I had to count, 6 frack-free years since the moratorium, 13, 14, 15, 16, 5, do that again, 5 frack-free years since the moratorium was lifted. Whether we can continue into 2018 and expect 2018 to be frack-free is going to be down to each and every one of us. Meanwhile, enjoy the beautiful countryside. Even though it's cold and there's a layer of snow on the hills and a layer of ice on the canal, it's stunningly beautiful. Well, maybe make the most of it, because unless we get our act together and make it very clear to the government and the industry that we said no, then we may be the last generation that's able to enjoy this stunning scenery. So thanks for joining me, and I will be in another location tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning. Meanwhile, please do your own research and do whatever it is that you feel you can do, you want to do, to help bring a halt to this insidious abomination. Thanks for joining me.